Welcome to tonight's meeting of the New York Technology Council. Thank you for coming. It should be a fun talk tonight by Andrew Blum. But first, let me thank our sponsors. We wouldn't be here without them. In particular, our platinum sponsors, Eisner Amper, Ernst & Young, PowerSPACE and Services, whose space this is, and Google. And the one change for, among our other sponsors, is that J.H. Cohen is now Cohen and Resnick. They've just merged. So we have a different logo. But thanks to all the sponsors. We've got Citron and Cooperman in the room tonight as well. And we literally could not do this without their support. So, on to why we're here, Tubes. We have, as you know, the author series. This is our third event in that series. And so publishers send us books. And Andrew's publisher sent us this one, and I started reading it, and it really struck a chord with me because I'm a great fan of the physicality of everything, but technology in particular. And it certainly has evolved, and I started at Bell Labs back in 1978, and a few years after that was out of research and doing slightly more practical things, and was going around and seeing the equipment. And it was great. And of course, technology is always changing, so there was piles of stuff on the side that was being replaced with the new, smaller stuff. And they'd, oh, take it, sure. And there wasn't much recycling in those days. So I'd take home something and gorgeous pieces of copper and so forth. And my wife would say, why are you bringing that home? But I knew why I was bringing it home. Anyway, we're delighted to have Andrew with us tonight. He writes about many topics. He's was telling me about a fascinating book he's working on. I don't know if I can repeat that, but
Article, yeah, just article, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll let you tell the crowd about that in a minute. But his works appeared in New Yorker, New York Times, Bloomberg Business Week, Slate, Popular Science, and he works for Wired and editor to Metropolis, and he is, like a number of us, a native New Yorker. So I will let him tell us about tubes.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't the book sort of covers a lot of different categories. The talks that I've done have been some sort of general interest, some architectural organizations, some kind of more technology focused explicitly. But it's one of the things that's been striking to me throughout is that it's not a topic that has landed or that is very much center of mind in the sort of most vibrant and active part of the tech community as we know it in the States these days. I was fortunate did a lot of press when the book came out in the spring. The place that ignored the book entirely was San Francisco. There's just no in Portland and Seattle I did 4 radio shows. In San Francisco, silence. And it's indicative, I think, of some of the disconnect between what we think the internet is and what it does, and its physicality in the way, at least, that I began to see it. So for me, I mean, this comes out of about 10 years of writing primarily about architecture, about buildings, and what's special about that for me is that and the way I sort of approached it. Is that you can, regardless of the sort of complicated mix of things that go into designing a building or go into the creation of a building, politics and economics and all sorts of social forces in the architect's design, regardless of the complexity of those things, and regardless of how hard it is to sort of get a grasp on all the pieces, at the end of the day, you can go and you can look at these buildings, you can sort of smell them, you can walk through them, you can experience them. And there is some physical reality that you can touch. What was strange to me was that about starting really about 5 years ago, with the arrival of the iPhone, with finally something that wasn't just occasional email, but really had certainly here has become ubiquitous and ever present and in everyone's hand walking down the street. suddenly I realized that my relationship to my surroundings, my relationship to the street, my relationship to the buildings around me had changed really dramatically. That my attention was constantly divided between the world sort of inside the screen and the world that I thought I was writing about, the world of sort of architecture and cities. And even more striking was that I realized I knew nothing about the physicality of that world. It was as if there was no physicality. I couldn't connect what was inside the screen, what was behind this pane of glass that was always in front of my face, with the world around me. Instead, I mean, if you look for images of the internet, this is all that you see. This is the ubiquitous image, where of this amorphous blob, this thing that's meant to be totally infinite. We're meant not to really want to look for ourselves on that. So it always kind of reminds me of the Apollo blue marble image of the Earth. And I think kind of similarly suggests that we're both meant to be in awe of it and meant to not entirely understand it. And that's all there was. This is what the internet looked like. And that disconnect between the physical world I thought I was engaged with and the ostensible place that I was spending all of my days, which is to say inside my screen, was really startling to me and sort of amounted to a kind of low grade existential crisis. It was like, how could I know myself if I didn't know what this thing was when I was supposedly engaged with the physical world? I was supposedly engaged with the world around me as a writer about architecture. And then this happened. My internet broke, and the cable guy came to fix it, and he sort of followed a clump of wires from behind my couch out to the back of my building in Brooklyn, and then there was a squirrel running along the wire, and he said, I think that's your problem. I think a squirrel is chewing on your internet. And this seemed preposterous because the internet, as you know, is a transcendent idea. It's a set of protocols. It's a economic force. It's changes dating and shopping and revolutions and everything. It's not something squirrels chew on. And in fact, it was, though. This squirrel had chewed on my internet, and my internet was no longer working. But it suggested that if a squirrel could chew on this piece of the internet, then there must be other pieces that squirrels can chew on. Fairly sort of facile, but utterly true point. And I had this image in my head of what would happen if I yanked the cable from the wall. How far could I follow it? Could you yank the cable from the wall and find the internet? I mean, it must be out there somewhere, and yet again, the only image of the network is that amorphous blob. So I started poking around. I started with the blessing of my editor at Wired at the time, who, when I said we should do something about the wires, he said we totally forgot about the wires. He went around the office and said we forgot about the wires, and started poking around and was immediately sort of stymied. If you went to look for images, if you went more seriously to look for the images on the internet, you ended up with stuff like this, with South Park, or the episode where the internet breaks, but they don't know if the internet's broken because there's no internet to tell them if the internet's broken, and then they become refugees in California because they hear there's internet in California, and finally they find this machine and they play the Close Encounters of the Third Kind chord at it to try to wake it up, and that doesn't work, and they shoot at it, and then finally one of the little guys goes around the back and unplugs it and plugs it back in, and then it works, and they say salvation, the flashing yellow light is steady green.
And the refugees like in Grapes of Wrath. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's very Grapes of Wrath. There are other more sordid things that happen in that episode, but I'll skip those. Or if it wasn't a big machine, it was a little machine like this, the British sitcom The IT Crowd, where they convince their colleagues that she can borrow the internet, this black box, for an office presentation, and normally it lives on the top of Big Ben, because that's where you get the best reception. But they've convinced the elders of the internet that she can have it for the afternoon, and she looks at it and she says, this is the internet, the whole internet. Is it heavy? And they say, of course not. The internet doesn't weigh anything. It's wireless, which is what we all say, and which seemed very strange. The one guy who seemed to have the number, the guy who seemed to have a sense of what the internet actually was Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska. The late Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska died about 2 years ago, who said famously that the internet is not a big truck; it's a series of tubes. And and this, of course, was preposterous because, again, the internet is a transcendent idea. It's a set of protocols. It's changed everything. It's not a series of tubes. But it seemed that he was a little bit right. That there was something to it. That there had, if you were engaged with the physical world, if this is the way you looked at things, and this is the way you wanted to seek things out, there was a way of finding the physical reality of the internet, its physical presence. I've spent a embarrassing amount of my life, the last 6 months, parsing the dictionary definition of tubes, and I can assure you that tube is the correct word. You might prefer pipe or conduit, but a tube is a hollow metal cylinder, and I am on firm ground with that. There was something else. There was one other piece that I left out that's worth remarking on. Of these images, I mean, this persistence of these images, the things that we forget, of the things that people suggest that the internet actually is, and the sort of poetry that's come out of that. And my favorite piece, I think, is worth going back to a little bit. A writer named Christine Smallwood, who says that the history of the internet is a history of metaphors about the internet, all stumbling around this dilemma: how do we talk to each other about an invisible God? And that seemed very evocative to me. And she made it more playful. She goes through and she tries to think of all the things the internet looks like, the sort of game of metaphor of how people have described the internet. She says a Tootsie Roll, a hot tub, a highway, or a plane, before she wishes finally that the internet looked like Matt Damon. Or she says, like lines of light written by an invisible hand in the night sky. And again, it's that same amorphous blob. It's that same sense of the internet being something infinite, and by virtue of your data moves through many paths, which we believe is the same thing as, because it moves through many paths, it moves through no paths at all. I mean, this is really how we think of it, and that, as I began to dig deeper, turned out to just not be true at all. I mean, that sort of that notion that it's so separated that we cannot track it was utterly not the case. If you set your frame of mind in the right way, and it's with that, it is an important caveat. This is a path of tubes. This is a railroad tracks in Kansas. I'll tell you about them in a second. But the caveat is that if they're primarily people who are professionally engaged with the internet, at least from a technical standpoint, are engaged in the realm of the logical, of the algorithmic, of bits, of zeros and ones. And if for the vast majority of us, that's a world that's very difficult to understand and very difficult to access. For me, it seemed like there were other ways of thinking about this. There was the physical. What is this? What are these machines? What is it made of? And the geographic. The where is it? How do I go there? Why did it end up where it is? Who put it there? And if the logical is completely inaccessible to us, the physical and the geographic are the world we know, the world we inhabit, the world we sort of learn to navigate as children. And so that, that's a caveat. That's, if when you load a web page, 1,000 things happen behind the scenes, and to parse that and go through that would take all evening and then some. And then it would still be beyond our understanding. For me, it was all a matter of sort of getting back to first principles and saying, what is it? Where is it? What is it made of? And that often meant really shrinking my temporal frame, focusing on a single instant, a single exchange of information, and along a single path, which again is a single page, a single web page is aggregate of thousands of the aggregate of thousands of those things, and impossible to piece all together, but no less true for that limited frame. So this is so we end up with tubes. We end up with pulses of light through glass fibers as the kind of fundamental physical unit. Are there any network engineer? Any of you are hardcore network engineers? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So and that if the basic unit today of the backbone of the centers of the internet, you could say is a 10 gigabit per second wave of light through fiber, and that becomes the sort of basic building block of glass through a tube of communication, and then manifests itself in places like this, which is a fiber optic regeneration hut in Kansas, that came about following a very surreal conversation. First thing I did with this project was a photo essay for Wired, finding places of the internet that we could photograph. And this place came about talking to a press person at what was then Global Crossing, who I said, is there like a regeneration hut, that amplifies the signal in the middle of the country? And she said, I don't know, let me find out. And we looked at a map and saw Kansas was the middle of the country. And then a couple of days later, got on the phone, the guy in Kansas City with a pickup truck responsible for all of the fiber optic regeneration huts in a 500-mile radius, proceeded to have this bizarre conversation about which was the most beautiful of those fiber optic regeneration huts. And this was the one that ended up. But it's striking as well. I mean, it is utterly material, and it's also built upon the old paths. Yeah.
Any coincidence that this hut is next to a rail line, which was sort of seen as the internet of the 19th century?
Not coincidence at all. Utterly connected. I mean, it is entirely coincident, I guess you would say. Based on Global Crossing did their original fiber optic build along with, I think I'm getting this right, along with Quest, which was the fiber optic history is, some of you know, is very complicated. The business history is very complicated, but was done as an offshoot of Hewitt? Anschutz, yeah, thank you. Okay.
The owner of the rail line.
The owner of the rail line, right? So the right of way was the thing. The right of way was totally crucial, and again you see that. I'll get there, but it's like again and again these connections follow the ancient paths. They're not, it's very rare that new paths are drawn, whether it's the fiber optic cables over the mountain passes in California, over the same passes that the roads go for sort of inescapable geographic and topographic reasons, or the undersea cables, which I'll get to. But keeping more with the sort of basic physical unit, if the internet's a network of networks, that's the most basic idea, and you have the connection between those networks is the crucial point, and the physical connection between those networks is utterly legible, and usually takes the form of a yellow fiber optic jumper cable from the router, the refrigerator-sized rack of refrigerator-sized blinky lights, yellow cables coming out of them, of one network connected to the router of another network, a Google to a Facebook, a Time Warner to a Comcast, a Global Crossing to a Cablevision, whatever it is, in very particular places like in New York, like at 60 Hudson Street, which for me is I see it as one of about a dozen buildings in the world that is by far the most important places where the networks of the internet meet and interconnect. And this list of about a dozen buildings is remarkable in that there are usually an order of magnitude more networks connecting physically with yellow fiber optic cables, connecting with each other in these buildings than in the next tier of buildings. Usually about 400 or 500 different networks compared to in the second tier places like Toronto or Portland or Philadelphia, normally around 40 or 50 networks of the internet connecting with each other, and with a very small number of people involved with making the very social and very personal decision to interconnect those networks. Again, if you load a web page and there are thousands of things going on behind the scenes and it all seems very automatic, it's only automatic because two network engineers likely had a beer together, perhaps at NANOG, the North American Network Operators Group conference, which meets 3 times a year, and which the network engineers go to. You talk about going to conferences to network. They literally go to conferences to network. Are you a NANOG member? No. Okay. And they decide that the other engineer is clueful, the opposite of clueless, and that there are reasons, traffic reasons or topological reasons to connect my network to your network, or business reasons. Maybe we will connect my network to your network, and I will pay you for the privilege, and then consummate that decision to connect networks with a yellow fiber optic cable in a building like this in 60 Hudson, with a connection to a cross-connected building like that. sort of ad infinitum. I mean, the jumble of cables behind your couch, raised to the scale of the building. Almost, not totally complete 400 times 400, not entirely exponential of all the networks of the building connecting to everyone else, but close. And to give you a sense of how few, there are very few of these places that are dominant, 60 Hudson being one of them, to give you a sense of how, not just how few places there are, but how few people are involved with this. But Nanoc usually has about 300 or 400 people. When I was at Microsoft, speaking to a lunchtime audience, turns out the only people at Microsoft who go to lunchtime lectures are the Xbox group. They're the only ones who seem to have the leisure. But they, Microsoft is a company of what, 90,000 employees globally. They said when I asked how many people at Microsoft are involved in running Microsoft's global network, their global data network, and the answer was about 200. And I asked how many of those 200 people are involved with interconnecting Microsoft's global network to other networks of the internet, and the answer was 2. So it's an incredibly small group of people. Google's peering team, peering being the word for connecting one network to another as if it were peers, unless it's paid peering, in which case we're peers, but I'm going to pay you to be your peer. Google's peering team is a small group. Is one for East, one for West, one for Europe. It's a handful of people, and that intimacy is absolutely crucial for the networking community. And it indicates as well the fact that these buildings are important, but they're sort of become de facto social hubs as well. But always with this kind of this basic unit of the Cisco router. I always knew I was inside the internet when there was a cardboard Cisco shipping box sort of stacked in the corner. Like that was the key indicator. And when it smelled a particular way, the internet has a very distinctive smell. Do any of you spend a lot of time in data centers? Yeah, it's like a kind of like burnt toast / ozone / like new car sort of burning plastic kind of smell. That when you walk into any internet building in the world, it has the same smell. I hadn't been inside the internet since I finished my reporting. It's about almost 18 months ago, and I hadn't really been inside the internet in a year. And in June, I was in Portland and brought a friend to see this Portland's major piece of the internet, the one building in Portland where the networks of the internet interconnected each other, Portland, Oregon, and walked in, and there was that smell, sort of like coming home.
It smelled exactly like the inside of a stereo. And it always stuck with me.
That's good.
The transistors and the smell
Yeah.
of the plastic, it never goes away because it's always the same temperature every closet you're in.
Yeah.
Always 73.
It's a very distinctive. It's a very. It's
Same temp, same smell.
yeah. I haven't been inside a stereo though. So I'm not sure. And then the piece that was important for me, again, it's the sort of what is it, but the where is it. This is a picture of a room called a fiber vault. This is the place where the fiber optic cables come out of the ground, quite literally. This is in a building in Ashburn, Virginia, which is the easy to call the capital of America's internet. When you talk to network engineers about the important places in the world, they say London, New York, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Ashburn, as if Ashburn were a list of a city that people talked about in the same breath as London or New York. But only internetworkers talk about it in those terms. But what I love about these rooms is that if the data centers are incredibly loud and incredibly cold, they're loud because of the air conditioning and the fans and the equipment, and they're cold to keep the equipment healthy. When you walk into the fiber vault, it's hot and it's still, and it smells like dirt, because this is where the internet, this is where this interconnection of networks, this sort of ultimate kind of nodal point, connects to the earth. This is the kind of seam between the network and the geologic crust in this room. And for me, that was very evocative of that. So this is Ashburn, the most important of these buildings, and another one of these sort of dozen most important buildings in the world, or complex of buildings, is owned by a company called Equinix. Equinix Ashburn is the kind of key spot, and it's the sort of complex of 5 buildings in the middle. behind the embassy suites and tucked in next door to the Christian Fellowship Church. But more remarkably, built in the shadow of it are these huge aircraft carrier-like buildings that are wholesale data centers. So if the internet exchange points, the places where networks meet, are the kind of distribution depots, the data centers are the kind of warehouses, the places where data is stored. And their relationship is entirely parasitic because more networks interconnect with each other at a place like Equinix Ashburn or at 60 Hudson Street than most anywhere else. Bandwidth is both most abundant and cheapest. For that reason, you end up with this sort of all the data centers clustering around these very particular hotspots, like Equinix Ashburn. When a piece of the book, a piece of Tubes was excerpted. The piece about this building was excerpted on Gizmodo, the blog, and with what I thought was the very sensational headline, the Bullseye of America's Internet. We did an illustration with image like this with red circles around it, and for the next week, Equinix kept tweeting, "We are the Bullseye of America's Internet. We are the Bullseye of America's Internet." Because the disconnect, there's this is a Google Maps screenshot that's with Equinix labeled. There's no implication that this building is secret. Equinix, the last thing Equinix would want would be for this building to be secret. On the contrary, they want to be very clear that this building, as opposed to 60 Hudson Street, the ownership structure is a bit different, but at 60 Hudson Street, Telex, one of Equinix's major competitors, is the sort of main player in subleasing internet space. But they want to be very clear that this is as important or more important a place, a meeting point of networks, than 60 Hudson Street. They will compete for that title of the biggest and most important, and that absolutely trumps the security need for it to be hidden somehow. And similarly, that's unequivocal. And it also creates, these buildings are sort of a strange kind of public space in that there's a kind of a sociability to them. These are the places that the network engineers involved with interconnecting networks will visit frequently enough to run into each other. And this is their sort of common ground, replicated, a dozen times around the world. In Equinix's case, that's been a very deliberate strategy to be the kind of Hilton of internet buildings, to have the same features, the same video games, the same red wall in each of their sites to kind of, to appeal. Well, when you ask them why do you have these cool blue lights and this big red wall, this sort of sci-fi looking thing, and they say, oh, it's for security reasons, so you can't see inside each company's, each network's cage where their equipment is locked up. And then when you push them more, and you talk to the founder, a guy named Jay Adelson, who's gone on to do lots of other interesting things, he says it looked cool. It was cyberific. It was deliberately designed to appeal to their customers, who are and always will be network geeks. It was designed. It was sort of they backed into it as it was made to look like science fiction. It was made to look like the internet. So if that's one key piece, and for me, in some ways, the most important and the most interesting, which makes up a lot of the bulk of Tubes, are the internet exchange points. These singular places where the networks of the internet meet. The next piece, the other piece, in some ways, the more poetic piece, are the lines in between. The long distance cables, particularly the undersea cables, that connect the world, and that's satellite communication is a rounding error. The vast majority of international communications are through these undersea fiber optic cables. And again, there aren't that many of them. Depending on how you count, if you're counting actual strands or systems, basically between 8 or 12 across the Atlantic and about the same number across the Pacific. And they're, in this dimension, they're very small. They're like garden hoses. In the other dimension, they're 4 or 5 or 6 or 8,000 miles long. Inside of them will be for a sort of steel coating to keep the sharks from biting them and to give structural strength, and then a copper cylinder that provides the power that powers the repeaters that amplify the light signals. So the repeaters are kind of like this big. They're sort of this look. They look and are the shape of kind of big bluefin tuna, and they're about every 50 miles or so, and they amplify the light on the they sit on the ocean floor and amplify the signal. and then at the inside, usually 4, 6, or 8 strands of fiber, 4 in each direction, let's say, that are through which light is pulsed. I mean, it's a flashlight blinking at a Morse code at the nanosecond scale. What's remarkable is if the basic unit today is a 10 gigabit per second wave of light, each strand of fiber can have many different wavelengths or different colors of light through the same strand. So you end up not with one 10 gigabit per second wave of light through a strand of fiber, but 40 or 50 or 75 different colors or wavelengths of light through a single strand of fiber. So your capacity ends up being 4 fibers going in each direction, and each one capable of carrying 70 10 gig waves. And then even more remarkably, every few years, the 10 gigs are turning into 40 gig waves, and the 40 gigs are turning into 100 gigs. I saw an announcement yesterday for a new cable to Brazil that's being built from scratch as a 100 gig cable. So it's designed for 100 gigabit per second waves. Or you can upgrade your current cable by swapping out the equipment on either end of the ocean, and your 10 gig waves become 100 gig waves. Coming from buildings called landing stations, sort of giant suburban scale house buildings that are essentially the lighthouses that pulse the light. This is a picture. This again is from the photo essay in Wired, but that is near Halifax, and that came out of this another sort of strange conversation of is there a manhole where the cables land? And the answer is yes, there is a manhole where the cables land. Well, which is your most beautiful manhole? It turned out to be this beautiful manhole. So this is my friend Simon Cooper, who until recently worked for Tata Communications, which is the big the communications wing of Tata, the big Indian industrial conglomerate. And Tata has moved into the cable business in a big way, partly by buying out of bankruptcy the system that Tyco built and was going to operate themselves they were primarily a cable manufacturer, and then built the system for over $1 billion. Then Tata sort of bought it for a song in the bust, and then proceeded to add new pieces onto it. And with this argument and with this idea that they would build a cable around the world, so they would have a complete system that circled the globe, and would then market it as such. Would say that if the cable in the Pacific is cut, fails for some reason, if there's an underwater landslide or earthquake and landslide which severs the cable, and of course if the cable's severed, you have to send a ship out, find the cable, pick it up with a grappling hook, find the other end of the cable, put them back together, throw them back in the water. Not a quick process. If that happens, they'll send your bits around the other way. They'll send them east rather than west. And then having done that, they thought about where else they could serve. And that ended up meaning new cables north and south, primarily to Africa, a couple cables down each coast of Africa. And it was that building, it was that sort of construction that I seized on, because it meant the chance to see a cable being built. It meant the chance to sort of see one of these connections being made. And so Simon said, so I told him I wanted to do this, and I was nervous about what he would say if he'd say, oh, we have yes, we have a new cable being built. It's it's in Guam, which is very far away, or it's in Somalia, which is not a good place to stand on the beach. And instead, he said, if you show up at this beach south of Lisbon at a little after 9 on Monday morning, this guy will walk out of the water, which is what happened. And he carries a lightweight nylon line called the messenger line. That's this first connection between sea and land. Then that's brought out to this specialized cable laying ship, and then a bulldozer begins to pull the actual cable in to tie it up on the beach, before then sort of steaming away, 8,000 miles in this case down the west coast of Africa to Ghana, to Cote d'Ivoire, all the way to Namibia and South Africa. But the landing process meant it was. I should have said, Simon's English. He's an Englishman working for an Indian company based in Singapore. The undersea cable is dominated by Englishmen. It sort of always has been. They all at the moment seem to be 42 years old, because they all started about 20 years ago. With the beginning of that boom. You can see the English engineers looking on, the Spanish underwater construction crew doing things. The local laborers, the immigrant laborers. Once the cable's in place and floated on these buoys, then the guy in the wetsuit goes back in the water with a big knife and cuts the buoys off, and the buoys pop up in the air, and the cable drops to the ocean floor, and he does that all the way out to the ship, and then they give him a glass of juice and a cookie, and then he jumps back in and he swims back. And then he takes out a cigarette, and then they need to kind of prepare the cable to be attached to the piece that's been brought down from the landing station in the manhole, and that means sort of peeling back the protective layers, which means going at it with a hacksaw. So if you're standing there watching these guys, go at this cable with a hacksaw, peeling back these layers until they get to the 8 strands of fiber inside, so each as thin as a hair, you stop thinking about the internet as a cloud. Like, it stops being this amorphous thing and starts to seem very very tangible. And then they protect it a little bit out, do as much as possible at low tide, and then before, so they don't have to put their scuba gear on, before they only put these sort of metal case on it just a few hundred yards out. For the rest of the way, it'll the farther out it goes, the thinner it gets. The cable gets lighter and less protected, and it's the same. It's this incredible. The material science is incredibly sophisticated. The math and the algorithms that go into the forward error correction, all these crazy things that allow for these fantastic transmission speeds, are incredibly sophisticated. But the basic premise of a cable connecting continents is 150 years old. The places the cables connect are the same. Always these classic port cities, New York or Mombasa or Mumbai or Singapore or Lisbon, and the same culture. The immigrant laborers, the English engineers. It's this sort of these patterns persist. And then at the end of this sort of 3 or 4 day process of getting up on shore and preparing it and it all being done, here's the manhole, and they put the manhole cover back on, and they cover it with sand, and everybody forgets about it, which seems to me a shame. It's this whole the constant discussion about the cloud, and every time you put something on the cloud, you give up some responsibility for it. You forget about it. It's covered with sand, and for me, that it shouldn't. We should know what we're connected to. We should sort of know what this thing is. So I want to finish with a sort of story of two data centers. Does anyone here work at Google? No, okay. I'll do this, then I'll tell you why. But the which are the first. This is in Oregon. The first ground up data centers of the number 1 and number 2 most visited websites, Facebook and Google. Facebook and Google both made essentially the same decision about 5 years apart, which was to build their first buildings in essentially the same place in Oregon, and in the Dalles, Oregon, in Google's case, and in Prineville, Oregon, in Facebook's case. And so this is in the woods behind Facebook's data center in Prineville, it's a huge building. It's 300,000 square feet, size of 10 Walmarts. Walmart being the measure of all things big. And the first one, they're building a second one. There's talk of a third one. It uses more power than Cook County, than the county in which it sits. You may have seen the series in the Times a couple weeks ago, which there are a lot of things wrong with, but it did convey how much power these buildings use. What's remarkable to me is if originally I sort of pictured, these buildings as they were described in the Times story, as these kind of belching factories in the landscape. The reality when you arrive there is very different. They are welcomed with open arms by the community, by Prineville. They are replacing sort of heavier industry. They are literally taking the power capacity, the energy capacity that was there, and our sort of high tech industry that in Oregon was everyone was communities were competing for. Even more remarkable in Facebook's case is that if the vast majority of the places that I visited looked like the back of a mall, these sort of tilt-up concrete buildings that were designed to sort of designed to not be designed to disappear. Facebook monumentalized it. Facebook decided this should be a point of pride from soup to nuts. I don't think that they went, as I understand it, they didn't sort of go and try to express something with their architecture, but by virtue of the rigor that they applied to the building as a whole, the architect did it anyway. In a building like this, where it's the shell of the building is a tiny piece of the cost compared to the equipment inside, the hundreds of million dollars of equipment inside. that was possible. And the result is a building with a lot of pride, a building that says that what's in here is really special, and a building that's wide open. Facebook has, as part of their Open Compute program, as they call it, has essentially published the plans to this building and said this is the most efficient you can make a data center, and we'd all be better off if as many of you could copied it, because we think this really works. And that was there's a joke to be made about Facebook being fast and loose with your privacy. But it was a signal to a real shift in the industry to start to talk about efficiency in terms of sharing best practices rather than using them for competitive advantage. But for me, it was exciting in that this is the place where, on a good day, meaningful things come from. This is the place where news of new babies and new jobs and plenty of banal things as well. But this is a place that had some emotional resonance. This was the place where those things were stored. And it was celebrated as such. Facebook took it seriously and was proud of it. Behind each blue light is a one terabyte drive for the moment, until it's then switched to 2 terabyte drive next year, you suppose. It was still, even being there, it was still sort of hard to make that final connection to say, I know these things are here, but what does that mean to me? I know I'm in the presence of these things as their physical. Their physical reality. They're not just as information, but as the hard drives in which they're stored. And was that significant? And that final leap was hard. You get to this final place, and it's not as if the sky opens up and now I understood what the internet meant to my life. But I understood more about what this building was and why it was there. But what was more striking to me was the contrast with Google. If at Facebook the doors are wide open and have been, and a lot of people have been to that building now, at Google, my sort of visit played out like farce. I asked if I could come see it. They said yes. I was then sort of given a tour of the parking lot. It was kind of marched across the campus. Was shown the Googlers' organic garden, but it was wintertime, so it was like, here's our patch of dirt. And when I asked, what goes on inside these buildings, a basic question if you're a journalist, visiting a place, the answer was, I'm sure that's information that we have internally, but it's not something we typically share. I'm sure they do know what goes on inside these buildings, but they weren't going to tell me. And then they then brought me to their cafeteria where we had as delicious a lunch as was reputed. But what was so striking to me was that by this point I'd been to dozens of these buildings, and the vast majority of network engineers and the people and building engineers, people who ran these places, were very eager for me to understand what these buildings did, to understand sort of how they're connected and how they're connected to our lives, and by extension, we're eager for you to understand that. And at Google, the company whose mission statement is to organize and distribute the world's information, the answer was, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it for you. This was not something they were ready to talk about, and the contrast between the dozens of other places that I visited and the sort of hypocrisy of that compared to their mission was really striking. Actually, I meant to add a slide. At the time, the satellite image on Google Maps of this building, of this complex, wasn't old. It was obscured. It was rubbed out. They've since updated it. I think I still have the old one, but it's also a place that is ugly. That's a judgment. If you write about architecture, you believe that architecture expresses ideals, and the ideals that Google was expressing in this campus were, for lack of a better word, sort of inhuman. We're rooted in, as they describe it, an engineering culture. For the rest of us, it sort of demonstrates a kind of, certainly my visit demonstrated a lack of understanding of what I needed and what I think a lot of people need from them in terms of understanding what this cloud is.
Where is this?
This is in the Dalles in Oregon. This is the first, it's their first purpose-built data center.
How many do they have?
Well, they won't tell you, but they purpose-built ground-up data centers. I think it's somewhere between 12 and 20, somewhere around that. Many other smaller data centers elsewhere. Worldwide. The New York piece, this piece? The Google bought end of 2010, 111 8th Avenue, their headquarters building now. 111 8th is one of these 12 buildings in the world that are the most important nodal points of networks. They bought it for $1.9 billion. It was the largest single real estate transaction in 2010. It was the largest line item in Google's filings of 2010. and they said they needed it for the office space, which might very well be true, but it was also, for people involved with connecting the networks of the internet to each other, was sort of like American Airlines, buying LaGuardia Airport and saying, oh, we just need a place to park our trucks. It's like it didn't reflect the importance of that. And our knowledge about these places is so limited, that didn't register. It registered in the networking community. I mean, the Wall Street Journal report of the largest real estate transaction of the year said 1/3 of the building is occupied by telecommunications companies. True, but doesn't quite capture the singular importance of this place as a node on the network. Next week, I'm going to speak at Google's Author Series. You can tell me how much of this I should include. Sorry, all of it. Okay. I think
to kill you afterwards.
Right. Exactly. When I got that invitation, I wrote back and I said, well, my first thing my publicist said when the book landed on our desk was like, oh, we should talk to Google. I'm sure they'd love to have you. I said, you should read pages 225 to 235, and she read them and said, okay, let's not. And then when I got this email, I said, do you know that I said these things? And then either didn't register, or they didn't care, or whatever. But we'll see. I'll add a couple more. I'll add that slide of the satellite stuff. They know it's a big company.
They know where you live.
Right, they know where I live.
I would say when you go in, you should, you even notice something. If you don't come out the next day, we'll know where you are.
Oh, they said I can bring a few guests, so I've brought a few. I've gathered a posse. But I told them if things heat up, we're running. We're making it. So, but the Google, but this message. I mean, this argument that we should be allowed to know what these things are. Was epitomized for me down the road from the Dalles, the Columbia River Gorge, at the Bonneville Dam, which is a WPA era Army Corps of Engineers still operates it. Classic piece of American infrastructure. When you go to visit, there's these huge sort of fortress-like gates, and you go through, and an armed guard checks your trunk. And then says, come on in. And then you go inside, and there's a visitor center with a gift shop and a fish ladder where you can watch the sort of salmon jump upstream, and these exhibits that sort of describe this complicated, economic and environmental history of what this dam has done. And there's no doubt this is a strategically important place. There's no doubt this is a place that needs to be protected, but it's equally clear that this is infrastructure that needs to be acknowledged, that we're allowed to talk about, that we're allowed to go see. And for me, that's what I feel like the internet should be and could be. In terms of 111/8, I mean, I am counting the days until it occurs to Google to put a Google Shop and little blinky light thing behind glass and says this is one of the most important places of the internet. That seems a worthwhile thing to do.
Journal today saying that Google is just taking a whole pile of stuff across the street in Chelsea Market, so that
Really, I didn't see that.
Already outgrown.
The whole building. Well, they're having trouble pushing a lot of the telecom companies out. There's a lot of chatter among the network engineers. That this, sort of, coral reef-like accretion, this kind of careful connection of one network to another at 111/8, that they've stopped all expansion and they've started to push out. They started to not renew leases. I don't profess to understand what the sort of, what the kind of, master idea is behind this owning this building. But it's unequivocal that this is one of the most important network nodes in the world. And it's also quite clear that the history of the development of these nodes has hinged on being carrier neutral, on the ownership of these spaces being independent of the people who are operating them, which is why you have a company like Equinix or Telex that are very specifically, they are in the interconnection business. They don't compete with their customers. And the freedom of networks to connect to each other and having this kind of neutral ground in which to do it physically, one router to another, is an essential piece of the way the internet's grown. But I'm sure Google is very nice, and that's not an issue at all. I mean, this is the sort of conversation that often has. Oh, they're fine. I'm sure they just want to help everybody connect, which might very well be true. Sorry.
The check is in the mail.
Checks in the mail. Yeah. So that's a big piece of it. But anyway, it is this dam. It is this notion that this is infrastructure we should be connected to. That is my concluding thought. So happy to talk about Google more or questions or whatever. Yeah.
I almost raised my hand first, and then I think of what I wanted to say.
Should we come back to you, or are you ready?
No, I'm
Oh, you're
not.
ready. Okay.
I'm interested in the slide of the building at Facebook and wondered what those white things are. They don't seem to have a structural purpose.
That's what the people who work in the building say. What do these crazy architects do? They're windscreens for the parking lot.
Are they really thick? Are they really heavy?
I mean, I guess they serve something of a security purpose too. The guy who was in charge of the building, a guy named Ken Patchett, is kind of larger than life character with a larger than life truck, and he's very annoyed that his truck doesn't fit in the parking spaces. he's a great valuable guy, but the people who work there, like people in lots of buildings, complain about the silly ideas that the architects had. The architecture community is like ecstatic about this building. I talked to a graduate studio at Yale Architecture School that was there last week because they're doing as their project, imagining what a third building could look like, and how this data center, how it could connect to the community in new ways. Essentially recognizing that there's this sort of moment for monumentalizing these buildings, for making them monuments, has come. But that's every.
I'm just wondering whether you'll ask Google if they wouldn't want to do something more different, better. Because if their buildings are ugly, I grew up with my parents building houses, so I grew up with designs on the
Right.
coffee table and maybe more conscious than most people about buildings, but are they at all sorry? Do they, does it matter?
I don't know.
Find out.
I describe it, but the conversation over lunch. Well, when I said, the conversation was about how wonderful it is to work at Google, and literally how many people applied for their job, and how smart they are, which is remarkable conversation to have when it was the least interesting interview I had ever done, because they couldn't say anything, nothing, and then it's not a culture of sharing, with the press, certainly. It's not a. I experienced. At Nanog, I crossed paths with a lot of people when I said, oh, this is what I'm working on. I worked on it for about 3 years. Said, oh, that's really interesting. I wish I can't wait to read more about that. I wish we knew more about that. At the Beer and Gear, the vendor party at Nanog, a junior sort of Googler said, that's great, but people really just want us to take care of it for them. And that might be true. It doesn't satisfy me. Wasn't the message that I got from everybody else. I didn't, and that was, AT&T didn't so much say no. I spent 3 weeks trying to find the press person who could talk to me about undersea cables, and finally gave up because it's such a labyrinthine company that they couldn't produce the press person who was in charge of undersea cables. But for the most part, the attitude was, let's talk about this. Yeah.
I've just two questions which aren't related. You talk about a building like this and monuments, and then you look at just the growth of exponential technologies. And I live in Westchester, and down the block from me is the original Bell System building for the exchange of our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Building, and for years it had been filled with wires and relays. And as a matter of fact, when we first moved there, you could actually hear at night.
A 1950s era building or a 30s era building?
Probably 50s, I
Okay.
guess. But who knows what was there before? But anyway, long story short.
Is that Hamilton Avenue in White Plains?
No.
No.
But
Yeah, they're all over the place. Yeah.
anyway, as you walk past the building now, I just noticed you can see inside. So as a goof, I climbed up on like the fire extinguisher and looked in, and all the relay racks are gone. And I'm
Right.
assuming in another couple of years they'll probably sell the building, because all of the switching equipment, analog switching equipment that took up that building, is probably now, in a unit this big.
Yeah.
So aren't all these data centers, look at DNA computing, whatever it is, in 10 years going to be white elephants, because all this stuff is going to continue to...
It's not the trend at the moment. At the moment, the need for them is far outpacing the amount of data we're storing is far outpacing the the advances the size of physical storage. And the efficiency is increasing. I mean, one of the things that was so bizarre about the Times series was there are a lot of messy, inefficient data centers. Microsoft's data center in Quincy is not one of them, and it was a strange emphasis, to sort of call it out as a kind of polluter, when it's the sort of the hot rod of data centers was surprising. That series got a lot of data center people all twisted.
And then, so several, my second question, about a year ago, I read Richard Clark's, Cyber War.
Yeah.
And then the past few days, I've been looking at all the Huawei stuff that's going around.
Yeah.
The whole issue of, you just kind of get the feeling that the entire, at least the United States, internet infrastructure is just filled with, Chinese logic bombs or something like that. I mean, is there a sense? I mean, Clark went on about this at late, about certain backbone nodes, certain things needed to be done that aren't being done. And his argument is that almost the entire U.S. internet infrastructure is completely open, if not already compromised by the Chinese and the Russians. And I sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but Clark lays it out in much more.
Yeah.
I'm reducing it. But did that come? And his thing is that everything it's completely wide open. It's completely being hacked. I don't know if that came up in any of your research or talking to people.
It came well. It did in so much as in the time that I spent with the Nanog community. They are a proud and fierce group, and the entire premise is that their networks are their own networks. If they are proud geeks, and they believe that their networks are run. They take a huge amount of pride in the way their individual networks are designed, and the security of their individual networks. And then they make the decision based on trust to connect their network to somebody else's network, and so it becomes very personal. And when you talk to them, you don't well, first of all, Wired did this piece on the NSA's new data center in Salt Lake City, that was written by Bamford, the guy who had written a bunch of books about the NSA, the pages of which that overlap with the inner exchange point. There's 2 or 3 pages in there that describe the inner exchange points that don't ring true with what I heard. Maybe they rang true 10 years ago, but the sort of structure has changed enough. More people are interconnected. But the NSA, the NSA's data center is, I forget the numbers, but it was basically like, it was something I think like a fifth the size of this building. And used much more power, which meant so the implication that the NSA's technology is so much more sophisticated than the consumer technology, it just doesn't ring true to me. I mean, it doesn't, in the same way that spy movies are much less interesting now that we have iPhones, because anything you can put in their hands would seem to do less than what we have. So I just, in talking to the router companies, I don't believe the router companies are either, trumped by, secret government labs, nor do I believe the router companies are giving their stuff to the NSA a year before they put it on the market, but I do believe in the effort that the network engineers put in, and that they're doing their best. So you end up with this sort of disconnect between this imaginary possibility of government and the best practices of a very sophisticated industry.
I don't mean domestic. I'm looking at
Oh, you mean otherwise?
About
well, if you're
Chinese and Russian government sponsored hackers.
It becomes very personal and very local. It becomes people like one of the guys who helped me the most, a guy named Tony Capella, going into his he's I feel like I'm like a politician talking about this plumber I met. It's like a guy named Rob Seastrom who has a cage in Ashburn. When he walks through Equinix Ashburn and goes into his cage, he knows what every single one of those wires is doing. And if it's not as if some Chinese spy is sneaking into his cage in the middle of the night and plugging it in. And there's this sort of surveillance. There's the eyes of the community, and it became less when you recognize how intimate it is. It becomes much harder to believe that there are these sort of there's this sort of rampant tapping. In the same way too that it becomes harder to believe that the NSA funnels everything straight in.
To take it to a more extreme, if someone took out 60 Hudson Street,
Right.
what would that mean?
This is the moment in the evening when we talk about destroying the internet. It comes every time. I do not often entertain fantasies about destroying the internet. This is my first premise. If 60 Hudson is a big building, everyone knows it's an important spot. After 9/11, it was surrounded by dump trucks. That was sort of clear. I know that firsthand. Somebody saw it and told me. But if you're Google and if you're Google and you're connecting to Comcast, I'm connecting my network to your network. We're doing it at 60 Hudson and 111 8th and Ashburn and maybe Chicago too. And we're setting up the link so Ashburn and 60 Hudson are working a pair. So it's sort of it's not only would it be hard to destroy, but each regional link is redundant. And actually Gizmodo the same week that we did my piece, Sam Biddle, a reporter there, reported the story. Called everyone up and said what would it take to destroy the internet. And it's this long 4,000 word piece about how to destroy the internet. And the joke at the end is you would have to simultaneously cut 45 undersea cables, destroy 15 large buildings. It's not in the realm of possibility. More and the owners of these buildings are very clear. They've been through their series of meetings about what standards they have to do that. A lot of the security standards are coming from the financial customers who have audit requirements that say you must have a camera every whatever feet. The security is often not as much about terrorism as it is about somebody walking out with a $40,000 box or a $100,000 box.
Or the data that's...
Or the data that's in it. Yes, thank you. And then finally, I encounter this again and again, is that the greater concern among the networking community is not terrorists, but is Washington. The greater concern is a misunderstanding about what these buildings do and how they should be legislated, rather than somebody blowing them up. So there's no, Equinix and Telex, there's no interest. They're not keeping any secrets. They're not, they have customers they don't disclose, but they're not, there's no interest in saying we don't want you to know what goes on inside this building. Only one company does that. So, yeah.
I love the book. By
Thanks.
the way, I read it, couldn't put it down. Lived in California during the 90s. Saw Silicon Valley, saw WorldCom fall.
Yeah.
Had a lot of friends go to Silicon Valley. Went back to live with their mom around 2000.
Yeah.
I was with the Navy SEALs and with the Marines for the beginning of my career, and what I watched is the internet grow, but the pace was sort of set by the government because with an unlimited amount of money, you can build something and put it out and put feelers out and put different clones out to the market. But now we see everything financial is on the web.
Yeah.
And what's needed is a nanospeed second infrastructure, which isn't. It's here in New York, it's here in Chicago, it's in different places. What do you see as the author of this book? What's driving who? Who is wagging who? In your opinion, is it the financial sector moving, or is it us moving the financial sector? In your opinion, based on this book, how do you see it? How do you see 5 years from now? Because everything is changing. As soon as online trading happened, that changed everything.
Right.
Because that is immediate trades happening now without even calling a broker. So now you have people at home day trading. That sort of changed the financial landscape. In your
The high
opinion,
frequency
what do you
trading,
see 5 years from now?
As everybody knows a little bit about the high frequency trading, the algorithmic trading and things of that. Just finishing up with the security question. I say this jokingly, but it's like, if the internet went down, the last network standing would be Goldman Sachs. It's like, that's, it's like that's in terms of redundancy and robustness, and the folks who put the most effort into keeping, having the most redundant links, would be that. The rise of the, I get, a press release about it every single day. So-and-so's dug, 25 new miles in New Jersey connecting, NASDAQ's data center with, so-and-so's data center. all to accommodate the high frequency trading. I didn't put in the book at all because it was changing so fast.
Right. Whatever you put in.
Yeah, right. No, that was quite clear. The changes. I was just saying this before we started, but I don't believe I think that the big cable ISPs are going to collapse into their own weight. I just feel like people hate them so much, and the internet has become so important that there'll be a kind of sort of Whole Foodsification of ISPs. Where suddenly people will want their organic artisanal internet and will be willing to pay a little bit more for it. And I hope that also means a sort of shift back to local. Just for the sheer reason that it's the neighborhood node is often the same as the network node. Those overlap, and Google's success in Kansas City has been amazing, and getting all these communities to sign up for gigabit fiber. It's bizarre to me that it makes perfect sense that Google is doing it. It seems like a major red flag. The notion of having Google own pipes is like completely anathema to what every principle of the openness of the internet. How that sort of flies under the radar screen is very confusing to me. Yeah.
When Google declared Kansas City, they said they'd have open access.
Yeah.
They've withdrawn that now. Do you have any reason to talk about that?
It doesn't make any sense to me because their interest is only in our goodwill, right? It's like I shouldn't be snarky about it. And I talked a little bit with Susan Crawford about this, who's one of the people who's been the much my knowledge of the policy stuff is very superficial, but who understands what the tensions are. And in fact, a lot of the argument is somebody's got to demonstrate it. In fact, it seems as if Google's success in the community has shown lots of other players what's possible with that there is a demand for this. It's very confusing to me that Williamsburg doesn't have a local ISP. Why? It seems like it would seem like a natural. Why? There are obviously lots of structural reasons.
They need a franchise agreement with the city.
Right. Yeah. That's something that should be talked about. That's something that there's certainly lots of.
I knew a guy who was trying to set it up, and he got bought it. He got a higher paying job and decided not to do it.
Back in the 90s or so, you used to have all these little local ISPs.
Yeah.
But they all pretty much either didn't go out of business. They all sold to Comcast and Cablevision just because it was like the same thing with individual cable systems.
That was after Brand X, which took out unbundling.
Yeah. No, there are lots of challenges, definitely, but
it's interesting that the people like Susan, who previously were gung-ho for net neutrality, and Tim Wu too, who invented the term, of having thought the thing through, now talk about structural separation as the only real solution. In other words, who controls the pipes, being divesting them from the people who control the content.
Yeah.
I watched a video thing last week where Craig Moffat, at the State of Telecom 2012, produced these figures that said that there isn't any money in transport. That the only way that the phone companies or all these companies can stay viable is to vertically integrate up into content. Do you think that's true? Do you think? Economics is kind of out of your range here. I looked at the peering stuff closely as in a kind of anthropological sense, in how the peering community interacted. The following the money in peering is very, very difficult. The transit costs have always dropped. The transport costs, it's a very hard business. It made it a little. From a journalistic standpoint, it made it a little bit easier for me because the level 3s and global crossings and interroutes and Tatas of the world are not so profitable so as to be impenetrable monoliths. They still have a kind of scrappy spirit to them, which meant they were more open in a way. I spent a lot of time with Global Crossing before they were bought by Level 3, and talking to their engineers. Going to Rochester, and they pulled out their nationwide map, and it's like there's every regeneration hut. This is the network. This is it. it's it's surprisingly limited. It feels smaller when you start to look at the pieces. Sorry, I missed something. I'm really answering your
I
question.
think transport is inherently a commodity business, because in the end, a bid is a bid. And
Well, that's what the ECNO proposal and all this is because it's that's why they're trying to put in sender pays and QoS and all these kind of things.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And that, I think of the way, the future of how it's sold and brought to our homes is going to be really interesting, because I feel like it's gotta, the businesses that do it, I think have to change. I think are going to change. And yet, I don't know if that means it's a utility, if it's,
I have a dream.
Yeah.
And the dream is that I will be able to buy a cable to my house, and I will be able to choose what service provider is set up a head end.
a house,
in that facility, which you wonder what they're going to do.
a house with a tail. Yeah. Yeah. It's what's interesting to me is that if you can get to 60 Hudson or 111 8th, you have the cheapest transit costs in the world. So all you have to do is get there.
Also was watching the African PIF, Internet Forum, the Peering Internet Forum, and they were talking about how it was cheaper to go through Amsterdam or London than to go from Nairobi to Johannesburg, and partly just because the sea cables are actually more efficient than any land form of land transport. Not to mention they have no man's land and they have elephants trampling across the cables and so on. So it's interesting to see if that's
I heard the same thing from an ISP engineer in Minnesota, who was annoyed that it was cheaper to go to Chicago than to connect to Minneapolis. It's the same. It's the same thing. So in Minneapolis, and I guess I don't know this history very well, but Minnesota, Wisconsin, and there's a history of community CLECs, of small.
It brings in interesting aspects of legal jurisdiction over who controls the traffic and what the responsibilities of people are increasing the responsibilities on intermediaries for what's carried on their network.
Yeah.
Where it travels.
The press guy at Tata, who helped me a lot with the access to see the cables being the cable landing and a couple other pieces that I didn't end up using, just became chairman. How do you say his name? Jitkowski. Jitkowski. Yeah. Just became his media guy, and so I was just emailing with him this week about trying to push some of the sort of this attitude, this sort of view of the infrastructure to in front of
the economics of IXPs are changing because of the content delivery networks, and so now it isn't just an end-to-end network. It's people peering and how many people can you host as to host their content within your IXP.
And that, and there's no transparency about it either from a user standpoint. I always, when Netflix doesn't work, on a Saturday night, is it because of the connection between me and Cablevision, or the connection between Cablevision and Netflix?
But a sophisticated user can do a trace route and figure out. Your average user can't.
Right.
But someone who spent 20 years in the business could figure out, what was slow and where it was going. So I wouldn't say it's not transparent. It's just not easily transparent.
It's not easily transparent. Well, there's no. I think there's a. As we become more dependent on it, and while it's still constrained, I think there's interest in a weather report kind of thing. In a sense of why is this? Where are the bottlenecks? How crowded are things today? And you see that. You see that when in the frustration and Twitter posts of people trying to watch Netflix on Time Warner in the East Village on a Sunday night, and you can't do it.
So you're predicting some type of load balance forecast along with your sun ears or showers. I like that. I like that. It's brilliant. This is your bandwidth. This is what you're going to have today. Or,
where it's where what's not just speedtest.net, but what's the what is the what is the holdup here? Where is there
taking the utility model to its ultimate, a metered broadband essentially.
Right. Well, and that's I mean, the rejection of metered broadband starts to feel much less. Starts to feel much harder to justify when you hear network engineers complain about having to design their networks for the peaks.
What about how do you see the wireless broadband explosion impacting infrastructure? I mean, obviously, wireless infrastructure could be your next book. I mean, on towers, you call it towers,
I was at almost all the business activity among the fiber builders these days is with fiber to the tower. So you have an existing tower infrastructure that works, as I understand it, geographically. There are enough towers to serve the users. I mean, there's their spectrum issues, but then as the bottleneck is just as often the bandwidth to the tower. So you have that becomes a huge boon for the fiber companies, at least to start. I mean, the examples. I mean, the additiveness of it. I'm blanking the name of the company. A New York area backbone owner who one of their major contracts is Yale, and every year Yale says, "Give us another 10 gigs." They just keep adding 10-year contracts on top of 10-year contracts. It's not let's replace this one with this one. It's we have this one, let's add 2 more on top. And that's it.
Yeah, I've heard though that wireless infrastructure is going to expand. I mean, they need more towers, more lower sites. There's going to be a lot more of that infrastructure as well.
And this one conference last winter, I mean, a lot of a third. It was a running joke. They tracked. It was called Metro Connect. It was a sort of based on fiber at the metro level, and they put a slide up of how many it's like 300 people of the attendees, what percentage were bankers, what percentage were lawyers, what percentage were engineers, and this year the bankers grew. The bankers were like 30 or 40% of the crowd because of this business interest in seeing the opportunity and the growth of these towers. And all the old fiber guys are like, good luck with that, having been through these cycles.
One wonders if there'll be a breakthrough in mesh that will just blow it sort of slightly out of the water.
Yeah, I mean, this was. I mean, I laughed like with the note. The Internet in a Suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
The New America Foundation's not them specifically, but
Yeah.
that project. And they took that description a bit too far. But again, with this government example, this notion, that there would be a Wi-Fi, drone blimp over Cairo that would, supply internet to all of Egypt. And it's like, can my cell phone work in Times Square first? Like, can we start with that? Like this notion that there's this, miracle technology that will then, change it. It seems, doesn't seem there yet.
But if your cell phone, mesh networked with all the other cell phones in Times Square, yes, it might, but it would be a disruptive thing. It wouldn't.
It would be. I mean,
I think they still need a technical breakthrough to make it happen.
Well, with the caveat that it's, if the internet is a singular whole, if you are connected to the internet and the assumption is you can get anywhere, then the backhaul becomes global, right? I mean, then the backhaul, the connection to the rest of the internet has to have with it the assumption that it's complete transit, transit. I mean, the description, the word comes from you can cross every network to every other. And until that, that's the...
And the backhaul doesn't stop your phone from working in Times Square.
No, sometimes. Yeah.
It's changed the subject. I'm sorry, I had to go out during the early part of the talk, but my favourite story about this thing is when we had our Hunter Newbie and he told us about the beginnings of telex, and when they were in there, they were selling minutes, and they wanted to connect with someone else, and so they figured out that they could drill a hole through the floor.
Yeah.
And then,
I got all this from Hunter. Yeah.
And so that gave them their kind of real estate approach, But the story of how 60 Hudson started, that they was Sprint.
It's a great story. Yeah.
I mean, did you tell this?
I tell this in the book. It's one of the things, to be honest, that's made me it's the single story in the book that makes me the most nervous, because the only place I've ever heard it is from Hunter,
Yeah.
And I tried to track it down, and I couldn't track it down, and nobody has told me it's wrong. But there are very few things in the book. That story is the one that's just so good, and seems right. And I believe I trust Hunter. But
you couldn't fact check it.
I've never heard it anywhere else. But nobody's disputed it.
Because he's part of the actual framework of 60 Hudson. He must.
I know. I mean, that's why I put it
probably
in.
got this from some old.
That's why.
Guy from.
So what was 60 Hudson, an old New York?
So the story. I'll tell you the story.
You want to tell
I'll tell you. Yeah, sure. Is that 32 Avenue of the Americas, the AT&T Long Lines building, right? So when with the breakup of the Bells, McGowan and MCI, was allowed to interconnect, was allowed to connect to the Bell system, but AT&T said, okay, fine, we're not letting you in the building. We're not obligated to let you in the building. And McGowan, Western Union had left 60 Hudson, but had retained rights to their infrastructure, which meant, for all practical purposes, the conduit up Church Street to 32 Avenue of the Americas. And McGowan figured this out, got space in 60 Hudson, got rights to that conduit, essentially knocked on the foundation wall and said, we're here. And the judge said, okay, you got to let them in. And with that tether from 60 Hudson to 32 Avenue of the Americas, 60 Hudson was established as the sort of the neutral ground compared to AT&T at 32 A of A. And as a result, all of the current generation of transatlantic cables in the late 90s went into 60 Hudson because that was where they could interconnect to neutral.
But the point of this was that this conduit, the way they used to exchange telegrams between the two companies in those days was by pneumatic tube. They had a pneumatic tube that they used to zoom the things up by compressed air, and that was still sitting there unused, and that's what they found out, and that was what broke open long distance in this country and broke open the whole thing.
So it's a great. I mean, it all makes perfect sense. I mean, so the
It does make sense.
It does make sense, right? Which is why I put it in. But I do, and it is the single thing in the book that I've been waiting for somebody to disagree with, and nobody has. So hopefully it's true. So, but you were old. You spent time at 32 A.
26 years, yeah.
At 32 A.
Not all that, all of them.
Yeah. Did you live through the transition to Thomas? Do you know what's inside Thomas?
Oh yeah, I worked there for many years and stuff.
What's inside Thomas?
Switching equipment.
Yeah.
High speed, the equivalent of data centers from 20 and 30 years ago. It wasn't called a data center then.
Right.
It's called a central office. But I'm going to give you just a quick number to throw out. So 4 floors someone was talking about the mechanical switch and stuff like that and the noise you would hear. 4 floors in 33 Thomas Street was replaced by 2 floors of digital equipment that did 4 times the work. So in other words, 2 floors did what 16 used to. 33 Thomas Street, but we went to digital equipment.
Yeah.
Back in the early 80s, my boss at Bell Labs, boss's boss,
I worked at GTE Labs, by the way. I was going to talk to you about that.
had been asked to estimate how big they would need to make a building for the new generation of electronic switch that was being designed. He had no idea. They're going to build a new building in Freehold, New Jersey. It's going to be the first one. And he had no idea, so he rounded up, and then the switch was finished. And it was a tenth the size that, so they had built this building to his specifications, and they only needed a tenth of it.
33 Thomas Street is 2/3 of a building, whether you realize it. If you look at it from the Thomas Street perspective, it's 2/3 of a building. The last third was supposed to go to Broadway. It was actually 33 Broadway was the address. No, 323 Broadway was the address. And once they came in with the digital equipment, it was like close off the building. We're never going to have to extend it.
Yeah.
Thomas, is that big building without any windows?
It's the
Yeah.
granite building.
Big brown building.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean I use it as an example of the black box of a single network. It's kind of the opposite of 60 Hudson, where there's this sort of sociability and static between networks, and that's AT&T, and that's end of story. And there's no journalistic account of someone being inside 33 Thomas. It's like it doesn't. The Wikipedia page says it's the.
I imagine there's still stuff, cables running through there and everything,
But it's a funny. I mean, it's
I
like
don't
this vacuum. The Wikipedia page says it's the most secure building in the world and it will survive a nuclear attack. But the link is broken, so I can't tell this.
That's having run the AT&T nuclear weapons effects program in the 80s, that's not a correct statement. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Yeah.